You're taught to fear disasters, fire, darkness, shortages, explosions. That training is outdated before collapse even begins. What kills you first is not the event. What kills you first is proximity. Collapse doesn't arrive as violence. It arrives as convergence. People cluster around the wrong signals because humans are pattern-seeking under stress. Familiar faces feel safe. Loud confidence feels decisive. Shared panic feels like information. None of it is protection. It is amplification. You don't die because the system fails. You die because you're standing too close to someone whose behavior accelerates failure. This is the first frame you must lock in. Threat versus carrier. The disaster is the threat. People are the carriers. Most casualties in real collapses don't come from the initial event. They come from secondary effects, misjudgment, escalation, exposure, delay. Those effects don't emerge randomly. They spread through social contact the same way panic spreads, faster than fire, faster than hunger. This is why community is not automatically safety. Groups are force multipliers. They don't care what they multiply. Good behavior slows failure. Bad behavior compresses timelines. You don't need a criminal or a villain. You need one predictable human pattern at the wrong moment. Here's what nobody tells you clearly enough. Collapse weaponizes personality. Traits that are neutral or even rewarded in stable systems become lethal when buffers disappear. Confidence becomes recklessness. Helpfulness becomes dependency. Optimism becomes denial. Leadership becomes coercion. Calm becomes delay. None of these people intend harm. That's the danger. You won't recognize threat by aggression. Aggression is obvious and usually avoidable. You'll recognize threat by pressure. Pressure to move faster than evidence allows. Pressure to stay when movement is necessary. Pressure to trust without verification. Pressure to act before thinking. Pressure is the signal. This is why most people fail early. They confuse urgency with importance. They respond to social pressure instead of structural risk. They move because others are moving. They wait because others are waiting. They mistake consensus for safety. Collapse punishes that mistake instantly. This series is not about monsters. Monsters are rare. It's about ordinary people whose behavior collapses decision space. Before naming the 5, you need to understand why proximity matters more than intention. Risk is not evenly distributed in collapse. It clusters. And once you're inside a cluster, your personal competence matters less than the behavior of the people around you. Survival is not about finding the strongest people. Strength doesn't slow failure. Strength often accelerates it. Survival is about avoiding the people who compress time. Anyone who burns decision time without creating options is a liability, no matter how capable they appear. When systems fail, time becomes oxygen. You don't notice it at first. Then you feel short of breath. Anyone who wastes time suffocates everyone nearby. The most dangerous people in collapse don't look dangerous. They look helpful. They look confident. They look calm. They sound reasonable. They speak in complete sentences when others are emotional. And they always insist there's no time to think. That sentence should alarm you more than shouting ever could. Danger rarely announces itself as danger. It blends in. It feels familiar. It feels like leadership. It feels like relief. And it always frames hesitation as weakness. That framing is how options disappear. The 5 people you should never be near aren't rare outliers. They are common patterns. You already know them. You may even like them. That's why they're dangerous. They don't believe they're threats. They believe they're helping. And that belief is what makes proximity lethal. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see where the survivors are watching from. And hit subscribe while you're here. The first person you should never be near is the optimist. Not the hopeful one. The certainty optimist. The person who believes outcomes are guaranteed because they always have been. This belief doesn't come from evidence. It comes from habit. And habit is dangerous when the environment changes faster than belief can update. The certainty optimist treats warning signs as noise. Flickering power is maintenance. Empty shelves are logistics. Delays are temporary. Each signal is reframed until it loses urgency. This isn't denial in the dramatic sense, it's reinterpretation. And reinterpretation consumes time without creating solutions. Here's the binary you have to internalize early. Hope versus timeline awareness. Hope feels good. It stabilizes emotions. Timeline awareness feels uncomfortable. It forces trade-offs. In collapse, comfort is expensive. Awareness is oxygen. Optimists are dangerous because they erase urgency without reducing risk. They don't panic. They reassure. And reassurance is socially rewarded. It lowers anxiety in the room. It creates consensus. It buys calm at the exact moment when calm should be converted into action. You'll hear phrases that sound reasonable and humane. Let's wait one more day. They'll fix it. It's not that bad yet. None of these statements are violent. None are malicious. All of them are lethal because they postpone decisions that only get worse with time. Waiting is not neutral. Waiting is a choice with compounding cost. The certainty optimist doesn't perceive time as finite. They perceive it as elastic. Tomorrow will look like today, just slightly adjusted. That assumption holds in stable systems. It fails catastrophically in unstable ones. Collapse is defined by thresholds, not trends. Once crossed, they don't reopen. This is how the optimist kills groups. They normalize degradation. They reframe loss as patience. They treat shrinking options as discipline. In stable environments, those traits are praised. In unstable environments, they function as sabotage. Not intentional sabotage, behavioral sabotage. Here's why optimism spreads so fast under stress. People want permission to wait. Waiting preserves identity. Acting early forces acknowledgement that normal life is over. Optimists give people emotional cover to delay that acknowledgement. Delay feels humane. Delay feels kind. Delay feels rational. Delay closes exits. Groups don't die in panic as often as people think. Panic is loud and visible. It triggers countermeasures. Groups die in consensus. Quiet agreement to postpone uncomfortable decisions until postponement becomes irreversible. By the time the optimist admits reality, reality no longer negotiates. Systems don't collapse all at once. They degrade, then pass thresholds. Water pressure drops below usable levels. Fuel availability crosses from scarce to unavailable. Medical capacity shifts from overloaded to inaccessible. These are not linear changes. They are cliffs. The optimist convinces everyone to stay on the wrong side of the cliff because stepping back feels premature. Once gravity takes over, timing no longer matters. The fall is already underway. You cannot argue optimists out of this behavior and collapse. Argument costs time. Evidence is always not enough yet. Every data point is framed as incomplete. Every warning as alarmist. The debate itself becomes the weapon. The correct response is distance, not confrontation. Distance preserves your timeline. Distance removes you from consensus pressure. Distance allows independent assessment instead of shared delay. Optimism doesn't kill by force. It kills by postponement. And postponement is how collapse wins quietly, by convincing reasonable people to wait until waiting is no longer an option. The second person you should never be near is the helper. Not the competent one, the compulsive one. The person who cannot tolerate friction and mistakes and rushes to erase them before systems have a chance to adjust. In collapse, that impulse is not kindness. It is acceleration. The compulsive helper intervenes automatically. They fill gaps before gaps teach lessons. They carry loads that should be distributed. They solve problems for people instead of forcing problems to be solved by people. This feels humane. It also disables adaptation at the exact moment adaptation is required. Here is the binary you must recognize early: support versus substitution. Support strengthens systems by increasing capacity. Substitution weakens systems by replacing capacity. When someone substitutes themselves for a process, they remove the feedback that keeps behavior aligned with reality. Feedback is not cruelty. Feedback is calibration. When people feel consequences early, they adjust cheaply. When consequences are absorbed by a helper, adjustment is postponed. Postponed adjustment returns later at higher cost. Collapse is what happens when costs return all at once. The helper removes feedback everywhere they go. Missed planning is covered. Poor decisions are corrected silently. Lack of preparation is compensated for. In stable systems, this looks like generosity. In unstable systems, it creates blind spots that widen over time. People stop learning because learning is no longer required. This is how dependency bubbles form. Inside the bubble, things feel under control. Outside the bubble, pressure builds. Inside, people relax. They stop tracking risk because someone else is tracking it for them. When the helper finally slows down, the bubble doesn't deflate. It implodes. This is where cascading failure begins. One person's exhaustion becomes everyone's emergency. The helper gets injured, overwhelmed, sick, or simply unavailable. Suddenly, no one knows how to function without them. Skills have atrophied. Initiative has disappeared. Panic replaces competence instantly. The helper rarely looks like a threat. They are admired, trusted, central. That centrality is the danger. Central points of effort become single points of failure. Systems designed around one person fail the moment that person does. Redundancy disappears without anyone noticing. Here's what nobody tells you clearly enough. The most dangerous moment is when the helper can no longer help. That moment arrives without warning. And when it does, the collapse is immediate because nothing else has been allowed to grow. Helpers also attract attention. Need draws people. People draw pressure. Pressure breaks systems. The helper becomes a magnet for demand they cannot sustain. The more capable they appear, the more responsibility accumulates on them. Visibility increases. Expectations increase. Load concentrates. They don't mean harm. That's the trap. Intent is irrelevant. Impact is structural. In collapse, outcomes are shaped by load distribution, not morality. A helper concentrates load until the structure fails. There is another layer people miss. Helpers distort risk perception. When someone keeps fixing things, the environment feels safer than it is. Signals are muted. Urgency disappears. By the time reality asserts itself, there is no muscle memory for response. Everything feels sudden because it was hidden. In collapse, the goal isn't to carry everyone. Carrying creates collapse. The goal is to prevent systems from depending on one person. Capacity must be distributed. Friction must be felt. Learning must happen while stakes are still low. If someone insists on doing everything for others instead of with them, create distance. Not out of hostility, out of preservation. Systems that survive force participation. Systems that collapse allow substitution. Because when the helper falls, they don't fall alone. The third person you should never be near is the leader. Not leadership as a function, leadership as a personality. The person who feels most alive when others defer, who becomes calmer as control increases, who experiences uncertainty as something that must be eliminated immediately, even if elimination means guessing. This kind of leader doesn't wait for clarity. They replace it. In stable systems, this looks impressive. Decisions are made quickly. Order appears where there was confusion. People feel relief. Someone is in charge. That relief is dangerous because it trades thinking for obedience at the exact moment thinking is most valuable. Here is the binary you must recognize early: coordination versus command. Coordination distributes risk across many decision makers. Command concentrates risk into one direction, one judgment, one failure mode. Coordination is slower but resilient. Command is fast and brittle. The leader moves groups quickly but not necessarily correctly. Speed feels like safety when fear is high. Movement feels like progress. But speed collapses optionality. Optionality is survival. Every rush decision closes doors you may need later. You'll hear phrases that feel stabilizing. Everyone follow me. We don't have time to debate. I've got this. None of these statements are malicious. None of them are violent. All of them narrow the future. When one person decides for everyone, everyone inherits that person's blind spots at the same time. Leaders under collapse bias toward visibility. They prefer actions that can be seen, measured, and enforced. Quiet adaptation looks weak to them. Waiting looks like indecision. Observation feels passive. They trade ambiguity for momentum because momentum reduces their internal anxiety. Momentum feels good. Momentum also outruns feedback. This is where groups fracture, not immediately, but structurally. When the leader is wrong, the error propagates instantly. No one preserves alternatives. No one practices dissent. No one holds back capacity just in case. Everyone commits to the same failure simultaneously. This is how entire groups walk into the same trap together. Here's what nobody tells you clearly enough. Charisma accelerates collapse. Charisma reduces friction to compliance. Reduced friction increases exposure. People stop asking questions not because they're convinced, but because resistance feels socially expensive. Silence is mistaken for agreement. Agreement is mistaken for safety. You don't need a tyrant to die this way. You need a confident voice when uncertainty is high. The leader doesn't kill by cruelty. They kill by collapsing decision trees into a single branch before reality has time to respond. There is another layer that makes this dangerous. Leaders under stress interpret hesitation as disloyalty. Questions feel like threats. Alternatives feel like challenges. This turns caution into social risk. Once that happens, intelligent people self-censor. Group intelligence drops instantly. What remains is speed without correction. Leadership as a personality also attracts followers who want certainty outsourced. People who are overwhelmed hand over agency willingly. The leader absorbs it eagerly. This exchange feels stabilizing. It is actually load concentration. Load concentration breaks systems. Distance matters here. Not confrontation. Distance. Arguing with leaders burns time and paints targets. You don't win debates and collapse. You preserve options by not being inside someone else's decision funnel. If someone demands alignment before evidence, step away. If someone frames hesitation as betrayal, step away. If someone treats speed as virtue without preserving exits, step away. This isn't cynicism, it's structural awareness. In collapse, leadership without slack is a liability. Slack means unused capacity. Slack means unchosen paths. Slack means the ability to say, not yet. Leaders who cannot tolerate slack will remove it everywhere they go. And once slack is gone, failure accelerates faster than anyone can stop it. The fourth person you should never be near is the lone wolf. Not independence, isolation as identity. The person who defines themselves by separation, who treats distance as virtue and coordination as weakness. In collapse, that identity doesn't protect them. It turns them into a beacon. Here is the binary you have to see clearly: autonomy versus isolation. Autonomy reduces dependency while preserving connection. Isolation removes connection entirely and concentrates risk. Lone wolves confuse the two. They believe cutting ties eliminates exposure. In reality, it removes buffers. Lone wolves reject coordination reflexively. They distrust groups. They hoard information. They move without signaling. They believe unpredictability equals safety. It doesn't. Unpredictability destroys risk sharing. Every task, every movement, every decision becomes a solo event with no error correction. This is how they create heat. When one person does everything alone, all visibility collapses onto one profile. Noise isn't just sound. It's pattern, repeated routes, repeated behaviors, repeated timing. Lone wolves leave trails because they have no one to distribute activity across. What feels stealthy to them is actually repetitive. They also misread resilience at a fundamental level. Resilience is redundancy across people. Isolation removes redundancy. When something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, the lone wolf has no buffer. No second set of eyes to catch a mistake. No shared load to absorb fatigue. No one to hold position while they recover. Minor injuries become disabling. Small miscalculations become traps. This is why lone wolves die faster. But that's not the main danger. Here's the part most people miss. Lone wolves don't just endanger themselves. They endanger anyone near them. Desperation radiates. When pressure spikes, isolated people become erratic. Erratic behavior destabilizes surroundings. It forces others to react. Reaction compresses timelines. A lone wolf under stress doesn't fail quietly. They fail suddenly. They reach outward when their margin disappears. Not gradually. Not politely. They take resources without signaling. They demand help without preparation. They move into shared spaces at the worst possible moment, carrying urgency and unpredictability with them. That unpredictability poisons trust cycles. Trust in collapse is not emotional. It's behavioral. It's built on signaling, consistency, and shared expectations. Lone wolves break those patterns. They withhold information. They appear without warning. They disappear without explanation. That behavior spreads suspicion. Suspicion raises guard levels. Raised guard levels increase friction. Increased friction accelerates collapse. Even if a lone wolf never intends harm, their presence forces others into defensive postures. Defensive postures consume time and attention. Time and attention are the scarce resources collapse punishes first. Lone wolves also misunderstand visibility. They think distance protects them. It doesn't. Distance without coordination isolates them until the first failure, and when that failure hits, they have no graceful way back into shared systems. Reintegration under stress is always loud, always awkward, always dangerous. This is when lone wolves become unpredictable liabilities instead of quiet outsiders. They don't know how to rejoin without disrupting. They don't know how to ask without demanding. They don't know how to wait without escalating. Everything they do arrives compressed and urgent because they waited too long to coordinate. Avoid proximity to people who treat isolation as strategy. Not because independence is bad, because isolation concentrates risk instead of reducing it. Autonomy with signaling preserves margin. Isolation destroys it. Lone wolves don't reduce danger. They focus it, and when focused danger enters your radius, it doesn't matter how capable you are. Your timeline collapses with theirs. The fifth person you should never be near is the calm one. Not composure, detachment. The kind of calm that disengages instead of stabilizes. The person who remains unbothered as systems degrade, not because they understand what's happening, but because they've chosen not to respond to it. In stable environments, this looks wise. It reads as maturity. Emotional control. Perspective. In collapse, it can be lethal. Here is the final binary you must internalize. Calm versus engagement. Calm without engagement is abdication. It removes urgency without reducing risk. It quiets alarms instead of addressing causes. The calm one delays signals. Their lack of visible stress communicates safety to others. People anchor to emotional cues when data is incomplete. When the calmest person in the room isn't moving, others assume movement isn't required. That assumption is expensive. Urgency is not panic. Urgency is alignment with timelines. When urgency disappears, adaptation stalls. You'll hear phrases that sound rational and grounded. Let's see how it plays out. No need to rush. People are overreacting. Nothing aggressive, nothing dramatic. Just delay. Delay framed as wisdom. Delay framed as restraint. Delay framed as intelligence. This is how the calm one normalizes decline. They don't resist degradation. They accept it as background noise. Power interruptions become temporary. Service failures become adjustments. Empty shelves become supply issues. Each acceptance lowers the baseline. Each lowered baseline shifts expectations. People adapt psychologically before they adapt structurally. That adaptation is dangerous. When decline becomes normal, signals lose force. Warnings stop triggering response. The environment worsens while behavior stays the same. By the time the calm one engages, thresholds have already been crossed. This is where groups fail quietly. People anchor to calm because calm reduces anxiety. Anxiety is uncomfortable. Discomfort pushes action. Remove discomfort, and action evaporates. The calm one doesn't intend to stop adaptation. They simply remove the emotional fuel required to initiate it. There is another layer that makes this behavior lethal. Calm without engagement creates moral permission to disengage. Others follow suit. No one wants to be the alarmist. No one wants to be the first to move. Everyone waits for someone else to declare urgency. No one does. This is how collapse advances without resistance. The calm one often believes they are above the chaos, detached, observant, objective. They aren't, they're just late. Detachment doesn't grant immunity. It delays involvement until involvement is unavoidable and costly. When collapse finally forces action, the calm one acts from a worse position with fewer options and more pressure. Their previous restraint didn't preserve resources. It preserved illusion. Illusion collapses instantly under load. This is the final pattern you must recognize. Disasters don't kill first. People do, not villains. Not monsters. Predictable behaviors in predictable moments. The optimist erases time. The helper creates dependence. The leader compresses risk. The lone wolf attracts heat. The calm one delays engagement. None of these people believe they are dangerous. That's why they are. Survival is not about finding the right people. It's about creating distance from the wrong ones. Distance reduces social pressure. Reduced pressure preserves judgment. Preserved judgment keeps options open. Distance preserves oxygen. Oxygen preserves thought. Thought preserves options. And options are the only thing that outlast collapse. This is the verdict you can't outsource.